The Nintendo Switch 2 is still in its early days, and yeah, waiting for the big first-party titles is slowly melting my brain. Luckily, Donkey Kong Bananza is gonna keep me in check for a while. You know how people say a great superhero game makes you feel like the hero? Well, Donkey Kong Bananza makes you feel like Donkey Kong in the best possible way. Massive, unstoppable, and one banana short of a total meltdown. Nintendo finally lets him go wild in a physics-rich sandbox built for him to play in and destroy. Honestly, it's everything Skull Island Rise of Kong wished it could be. Jokes aside, it's not perfect. There are some stumbles here and there, but what's here feels fresh, fun, and bursting with the signature Nintendo charm we all know and love. Without delaying any further, join us here at GamingBolt as we review Donkey Kong Bananza. Let's dive in. If you're looking for a deep, thought-provoking plotline, well, you came to the wrong place. Donkey Kong Bananza doesn't waste time with an overly complex story. It knows exactly what it wants to be. A fun, momentum-driven adventure with just enough heart to keep you invested. The setup is downright absurd. The game starts with Donkey Kong and his fellow apes deep underground, mining a powerful energy source called Bananzium, which naturally DK eats like candy. But things go south when a giant meteorite destroys their whole operation and scatters all the banana or candies they work so hard to get. The craziness is far from over though, as Kong finds a talking purple rock that, after a few hours of gameplay, turns out to be a little girl named Pauline. She was transformed by Voidco, an evil mining megacorp that's mostly to blame for what happened to not only Pauline, but to Donkey Kong and his friends. What unfolds is surprisingly emotional, as DK sets off to reclaim his precious gems and Pauline searches for a way back to her normal world. They don't start as a team, but watching their bond grow, especially through their shared goal of taking down Voidco, adds a layer of warmth that you don't usually expect in a game about smashing giant green glowing bananas. While the plot is mostly delivered in a straight line as you go from point A to point B with a set objective, the writing still finds space for layered jokes, clever environmental storytelling, and a few genuinely heartfelt moments. Pauline's grounded presence plays off DK's lovable brute force in a way that keeps things balanced. If there's a knock against the story, it's that the linearity sometimes makes the supporting cast feel like glorified cameos rather than fleshed out characters. You'll meet cool side characters and bosses, sure, but most of them don't get enough screen time to leave a lasting impact. That said, the dynamic between DK and Pauline carries enough charm to make up for it, and the ride is still a total blast. Gameplay is where Donkey Kong Bananza really pops off. The game literally opens with Donkey Kong in an empty room and basically tells you, hey, see this room? Go bananas. At first, you might think it looks a bit like Mario Odyssey, but once you start playing, you'll realize Donkey Kong is a whole different beast. Unlike Mario, DK's toolkit is stacked. He can climb, dig, float, surf, swim, and more. Just moving around feels fantastic. There's a sense of weight and momentum that makes you feel like an unstoppable force as you barrel through the game's multiple stages. The real magic though lies in how each level is built. They're layered literally with multi-tiered biomes packed full of hidden rooms, alternate routes, and platforming challenges. And in true Donkey Kong fashion, the game sometimes lets you skip entire puzzles or obstacles just by punching straight through them. It's a sandbox that rewards brute force just as much as brainpower. Exploration constantly rewards you, and the collectibles aren't just there for completionists, they actually matter. One of the main collectibles are fossils. Gather enough and you can trade them in for new fur colors for Donkey Kong, or more importantly, for different outfits that both he and Pauline can wear. These aren't just cosmetic either. Each piece of clothing grants passive bonuses like faster swim speed, reduced damage, quicker energy regeneration, and more. You can mix and match outfit pieces to stack effects and fine-tune your playstyle. It's not a deep RPG system, but what's here adds a welcome layer of customization that keeps gameplay fresh. You'll also be collecting Bonanzium, basically Bonanza's version of Odyssey's Power Moons. You don't need a certain number to keep progressing through the story, but they're everywhere. You'll find them by solving puzzles, clearing challenge rooms, or poking around off the beaten path. For every 5 Bonanziums you collect, you get a skill point to spend on Donkey Kong's skill tree. This lets you boost his health, strengthen his punches, or unlock new abilities like a spinning jump or a better sonar scan. But the real standout here are the Bonanza forms. As you progress, DK gains wild transformations that change how you explore and fight. Kong Bananza is your Super Saiyan Hulk Smash style mode where you can absolutely wreck everything in sight. Zebra Bonanza cranks up your movement speed and adds zipline traversal. Ostrich Bonanza lets you glide over gaps like a maniac with feathers. Each form has its own strengths and the game keeps pushing you to get creative with how you combine them. You can swap between forms on the fly using the D-pad, which opens up some great combos, like smashing enemies as Kong, dashing to the next group as Zebra, then transforming back mid-air to keep the chaos going. The Banana G meter adds a bit of resource management to keep things from getting too brainless while still making you feel powerful. It's no surprise that Donkey Kong Bananza gets compared to Mario Odyssey. There are clear similarities and it's obvious the devs built on the same DNA, but Bonanza doesn't just copy. It builds. It turns Odyssey's precision into something far more chaotic and freeform. If Tears of the Kingdom was a wild evolution of Breath of the Wild, then Bonanza feels like the same kind of upgrade, just with way more bananas. Donkey Kong Bonanza looks and sounds like a Saturday morning cartoon powered by rock and roll and jungle juice. The art direction is striking across the board, with each underground layer serving as its own biome. One minute you're in a crystal cave, next you're at a lagoon. There's a sense of discovery and momentum in the environments that keeps each new level visually fresh. The devs clearly had fun designing each space to be both a playground and a spectacle. Structures fall apart as you punch through them. Backgrounds react to the chaos. Bosses often turn the entire screen into a light show of debris, explosions, and environmental hazards. It all looks awesome, but that's also where the one big visual downside kicks in. During high-intensity moments, especially in boss fights, the frame rate can take a hit. It's not constant and it doesn't make the game unplayable by any means, but you'll notice when it stutters mid-battle or during flashy transformations. Audio-wise, straight bangers. Bonanza's soundtrack refuses to chill, in the best way. There's a little bit of everything here. Classic Donkey Kong jungle beats, tribal drum breakdowns, and even synthy underground techno. And then there's Pauline. Every time you activate a Bonanza form, she belts out a custom theme song that's part hype track, part motivational anthem. It's ridiculous, and it works. Pauline's music is probably the best part of the game. They're legit earworms you'll probably find yourself humming outside the game. Aside from that, the sound effects hit just as hard. Every punch, slap throw, or enemy bonk is tuned to give that crunchy, satisfying oomph. Even DK's grunts and the way the rubble crunches beneath your feet contribute to the rhythm of gameplay. It's the kind of audio design that makes everything feel tactile and alive, even when you're just literally smashing rocks. Donkey Kong Bananza is Nintendo doing what they do best, crafting a playground that has charm, replayability, and most important of all, fun. It's a game that respects your curiosity, encourages experimentation, and makes even the act of smashing a wall feel like progress. Sure, the story is a bit linear and the performance dips now and then, but those are minor blips on an otherwise golden banana. For $70, you're getting a game with loads of replay value and gameplay that never stops being fun to dive into. So whether you're a Donkey Kong diehard or just looking looking for your next big platformer obsession, Bananza is definitely a must-play, as we are giving it a deserved score of 94 out of 100. But what about you? Are you swinging into Donkey Kong Bananza? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments.
The Nintendo Switch 2 receives its first must-play exclusive in a fun and frantic 3D platformer where destruction is its own reward. If there's one thing more satisfying to do in games than building, surely it's destroying. The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction understood it, Red Faction Guerrilla understood it, and now it's the time of the geniuses at Nintendo to have a bash at it in the form of Donkey Kong Bananza. Much more than just an endless destructathon presented in the guise of a wholesome 3D platformer though, Donkey Kong's first full-fat adventure in over 2 decades is also more thoughtful, inventive, and satisfyingly in-depth than you might think. In several ways, DK's lair-hopping adventure follows in Super Mario Odyssey's joyful footsteps, true, yet it also forges its own path by leaning into DK's natural strengths to make demolition the ultimate form of expression and creativity. As the first proper first-party Nintendo Switch 2 game not to confine you to a vehicle, Donkey Kong Bananza makes a good impression through just how drop-dead gorgeous it is. It's been close to 10 years since Mario's hat-throwing adventure impressed in both hybrid and handheld mode after all, so it shouldn't be surprising to learn that DK's explosive solo outing blows it out of the water visually. Colors pop, and the sheer scale of environments astound in almost every different layer you dig deep into. It helps that there's a generous number of them to mash your mitts into. One minute you can find yourself swimming up and through the beautiful rivers of the lagoon layer, while the next you're rolling through the wonderful green fields of the hilltop layer in search of that next shiny Banandium gem. Because yes, like all good 3D platformers seeking to pay tribute to the genre's golden age, collecting items is very much the name of the game in Donkey Kong Bananza 2. Bringing a touch of spice, of course, is the fact that pretty much every type of surface can be bashed, crashed, thrown, and dug into. A premise as ambitious as this could have easily fallen flat, but in the hands of Nintendo, it's a magic trick that regularly rewards your freedom of expression, as well as Donkey Kong's penchant for destruction. It works so well since every biome you visit is essentially made up of voxels. This, combined with the ability to smash forwards, downwards, and upwards, often means that no chunk of land is safe from DK's endless hunger and search for bananas. Ensuring that each layer you visit on your journey to reach the planet's core still has some identity, however, is the fact that you are indeed limited to how much havoc you can wreak upon them. Unlike, say, a Minecraft world, layers in Bananza all have a beginning, middle, and end. It just so happens that the gaps between them are generously large. Opting to make each layer be handcrafted by design also allows Nintendo to populate them with a near unfathomable number of hidden secrets, collectibles, and Easter eggs to find. So much so that players wanting to find absolutely everything should expect to spend more than a couple hours alone in some of Donkey Kong Bananza's biggest biomes. Doing so is always made worth it too, since there are always so many Banandium gems, costume unlocking fossils, and so much gold to gather. This is a game where quite literally carving your own path means bumping into a prize worth discovering around almost every corner. Not once over the course of the game's 15 to 20 hour runtime does finding something new to discover ever get boring. Of course, joining DK on this bombastic adventure through a whole planet is Pauline, here presented as a younger incarnation trying to discover the power of her own voice. In terms of gameplay, having her sing means revealing the best path in which to reach the next objective, but it also comes in handy to remove the evil Void Company's malicious tape. The latter is the only way to unveil each layer's bonus gates and challenge stages, which serve as a mostly great way to break up the main story by testing your abilities with DK's power set within tightly contained platforming scenarios. While trying to turf surf your way through obstacles down a large hill to reach the finish, or overhead climbing while dodging enemies proves fun enough, it's in these challenge rooms that Bananza also occasionally pays tribute to the Great Apes 2D days in the Donkey Kong Country series. Working out all the best ways classic mechanics like barrel blasting and rolling works during these scenarios also makes for an interesting setup, which, when combined with all new gameplay features like turf throwing and downwards digging, makes trying to find each bonus stage's Banandium gems a true test of timing and skill. Better yet, each one being totally optional helps to avoid frustration from ever setting in, since you can always move on and come back later. Speaking of which, completing challenges both in and out of specific stages is given new dimensions and depth as the adventure goes on, as DK collects different types of animalistic Bonanza transformations. Powered by the endless amount of gold you collect, each one has its own specific uses, whether it's Kong Bananza's ability to punch through particularly tough surfaces, Zebra Bonanza's nature to charge over gaps and bridges at pace, or Ostrich Bonanza's generous flying and gliding sensibilities. Nintendo is definitely keeping the best one a secret for players to discover naturally, but I'd be lying if I said that all were created equally, since the last Bonanza's skills feel particularly undercooked. That said, all do well to make you think differently about your environment and offer new ways to traverse them uniquely. For as great as letting you unleash your destructive creativity as Donkey Kong Bonanza is, however, there are a few areas where it's less successful. One is in how gold as a currency becomes almost pointless the further into the adventure you continue. Sure, there's a small penalty on the rare occasion you'll lose all your lives, but it's just so plentiful that gaining it back is rarely ever an issue. Then there's the bosses, which start out seriously inventive, but the game's decision to bring back so many in remixed form eventually grates, since the method to take them down doesn't particularly change all that much. Thankfully, Bonanza's final boss mostly makes up for this by leaning big into visual spectacle and being absolutely, well, bananas. Donkey Kong Bonanza's main verb being destroy could have so easily made exploring stages simple and uninteresting, yet Nintendo has found multiple ways to ensure this is not the case. From encouraging discovery by peppering every layer with countless collectibles and secrets, to making DK and Pauline's powers work harmoniously well together. It succeeds in being a new breed of 3D platformer, the type of which I can comfortably say I've never played before. A few niggles aside, Donkey Kong Bonanza might be less elegant than Super Mario Odyssey's brand of precision platforming, but that's by design. The result is something a tad messier, but by no means less creative or charming. We at All Out Gaming give Donkey Kong Bonanza a 4 out of 5. So there you have it in terms of our Donkey Kong Bonanza review. Do you plan on picking this one up? Let us know in the comment section below.
As a rare Donkey Kong fan, I wasn't excited to play Donkey Kong Bonanza until I learned some late game spoilers. Now, finally, after beating the game, do I think this is the best way forward for Donkey Kong? This video will cover what I like and dislike about the game, not influenced by any other reviews. Without further ado, let's get started. So I finished Donkey Kong Bonanza, playing it for about 25 hours. I haven't collected every banana or fossil, but that's not necessary. Going into the game, I was not expecting much. I hated the redesign of Donkey Kong, most notably his tongue inexplicably sticking out all the time, and I didn't think the inclusion of Pauline was respectful to rare DKC games by essentially removing Diddy or Dixie as Donkey Kong's partner character. I also didn't think the game, developed by the Super Mario Odyssey creators, looked or played like a Donkey Kong game, but rather a 3D Mario game with Mr. Driller, Breath of the Wild, and Rampage injections. However, I'm happy to report that the game is actually fun to play, but was I wrong about my concerns? First, let's talk positives. To start off, the game looks pretty good. I wouldn't say that it blew me away graphically, but I own an Xbox Series X, and I'm used to games that look pretty decent. It is, however, the best looking Donkey Kong game on a technical level. I prefer the art style of all the Super Nintendo DKC games, and maybe even Tropical Freeze, but there's no denying that this is a next generation Donkey Kong game, the likes of which we've never seen before. The starting area actually happens to be my favorite, since it kind of reminds me of DKC 2 with its darker atmosphere. Yeah, even though the game takes place underground, most of the areas aren't actually dark. The environments remind me of World of Warcraft's recent expansion, The War Within, where most of the game takes place underground, but there's somehow tons of light, and it looks like it's not actually underground. I gotta be honest, I don't think that makes much sense. And it kind of annoys me a little bit when I think about the logic of it, or lack of logic. I understand that to take advantage of the digging and destruction gameplay, Nintendo needed to make the game take place underground, but I definitely prefer DK Island as a setting, both for my own sanity and for its logical variety. Oh, and if you're wondering, no, at least from my 25 hours of gameplay, Donkey Kong Island is not a playable area. Another positive is a big one, and that's the gameplay. Look, I have some negative things to say about this later on, but as a non-Donkey Kong game, as in if you look at this game as a new IP, this is a really great gameplay hook. Smashing and destroying things is tons of fun, at least throughout the story's duration. I also like collecting the many fossils, bananas, and other collectibles. If you're an N64 Collectathon fan, you'll probably love the gameplay. Although there is some platforming and puzzle solving, the majority of the game is either fighting enemies or digging and smashing things. And luckily, that doesn't get boring for the story's duration. Although, post-game, without much direction, I did find myself getting a little sick of it. Unlike Super Mario Odyssey, where collecting moons didn't really matter that much after a certain point, bananas are actually useful here. You use bananas to upgrade your skills, and then at the end of the game, you need bananas to take part in post-game rehearsals. Rehearsals are just like challenge gauntlets, where you have to survive waves of enemies and puzzles until the end. And that's where I'm currently at in the game. I kind of like the skill tree, although let's be honest, it doesn't really suit a Donkey Kong game to upgrade your moves. However, in the service of gameplay, it's an interesting and probably smart idea with plenty of mostly optional upgrades. There are bananas and fossils hidden literally everywhere in this game, and while you might get sick of the sheer number of collectibles, I personally didn't mind it as much as I could have. One of the biggest positives for a Donkey Kong fan is that there are references to prior rare DKC games. There are at least 2 bonus levels that are ripped pretty much exactly from DKC 1 and DKC 2, and they were by far the best parts of the game with the best music and gameplay. Sadly, that does mean I wish they had made a DKC sequel instead, but I'll take what I can get. Diddy and Dixie also make a very brief appearance in one of the shortest levels, and I'm relatively satisfied with their representation in terms of dialogue. However, I do wish they had more to do in the game, but we'll talk about that later on in the review. Cranky Kong is a highlight, definitely a step up from his dialogue in DKC Returns and Tropical Freeze, and even Rambi makes an appearance here and there. That said, I think he was heavily underutilized, with only one gameplay segment that, to be honest, wasn't that fun. The music in the game is not bad, and at times really good, but I don't think it's on the level of any of the DKC games. Yes, if you include remixes of old games, then maybe, but that's kind of cheating. I need to listen to the music more before I definitively rank the tunes, but while playing the game, I never really stopped to go, wow, the music is amazing, except for when a particular DKC 2 track made an appearance. I'll just go ahead and say it, and that's the final couple hours of this game should have been the entire game. I'm gonna reveal a spoiler here, so if you don't want to know what happens, you can skip ahead a little bit. Alright, so yeah, King K. Rool and the Kremlings and many of the enemies from older DKC games make a triumphant reappearance in Bananza, but only in the final couple hours. I wish that instead of hiding the enemies, that they were visible in plain sight the entire time, but what they've done is make it so you only really see them after you've defeated them, except for the bees for some reason.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees!
The greatest surprise of the game is the many different King K. Rool boss fights, and those battles can be challenging. That's interesting because I found that most other bosses in the game were laughably easy, but the final Void Co. boss fight, as well as 2 of the 3 K. Rool fights, were relatively challenging. Not overly challenging, sure, but a small child might have difficulty defeating these bosses even after many attempts. It's great to see K. Rool back, and I have to admit I was extremely happy with the way they portrayed him and his epic final battles. I am so glad that the new enemies weren't the final bosses because, well, I didn't actually like the new enemies that much. Anyway, if you just want K. Rool back in a faithful and epic way, then this game does deliver in spades. Also, for all the complaints I will have about Pauline later on in this review, I did like her bittersweet ending. Well, kind of ending. And she wasn't as bad as she could have been. I think younger kids, especially girls, will adore her, so if you're a 13-year-old Disney princess-loving girl, Pauline is nothing but a welcome addition. Overall, the game has plenty of positives, with the most notable being the gameplay is simply fun. Especially in the first 20 hours, you will definitely enjoy the gameplay loop, even if technically it is repetitive. There are some things that break up the usual smashing gameplay, like challenge areas, some platforming, puzzles, etc., but the majority of the game is hitting things and digging up stuff. I don't think it feels like a Donkey Kong game, but rather it feels like Donkey Kong is a skin that they slapped on a new IP, but if this were a new IP, I would call it a great one. Okay, still here? Now it's time to put on our critical, cave-dwelling, Donkey Kong Country-loving, banana-tinted glasses and destroy this game with the negatives. Let's start off with a big one. I didn't like that Pauline replaced Diddy or Dixie or Kiddy Kong as a partner character for Donkey Kong. I have nothing against Pauline, but I just don't care about her in a Donkey Kong game. Pauline has never appeared in a rare Donkey Kong game before, and the very notion that she has more screen time than every other character combined except for Donkey Kong is a little ridiculous as a rare Donkey Kong fan. As I mentioned in the positives, Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong only show up for a brief few seconds in a rather unfun minigame. It made me a little angry, to be honest, because I wish Diddy or even Dixie were the star of the show along with DK. Now that I think about it, why couldn't Dixie Kong be the one to sing? Also, I don't like Diddy's redesign, who for some reason has undergone a downgrade that looks as though an AI model generated it. It's not as noticeable as DK's redesign, but that makes it all the more unnecessary, and it seems as though Nintendo did it just for the sake of it, rather than for any good reason. I don't know why there's a line of flesh between Diddy's eyes, and the DD symbol on his hat looks like an afterthought. It's not as bad as Donkey Kong's redesign, but it's just kind of frustrating to see. Speaking of Donkey Kong's redesign, I know a lot of Mario fans love this redesign, but as a rare DKC fan, I don't like it. I just think he looks more stupid, and whenever his tongue is sticking out, which happens a lot, I just wish for the old rare design. Sorry, but nope. I have played this game for over 25 hours, and I'm still not used to it. I never will be, honestly. I don't like this design, and that's perfectly fine. I don't need people in the comments telling me I'm wrong for having an opinion, and I know the creator of the old rare design apparently loves this redesign, but so what? Just because he created the old design doesn't mean his opinion changes my opinion, nor should it. He's allowed to be nice and say whatever he wants, but so am I. I don't like the new design, and I wish the old one would come back. On the topic of Pauline, she's not as annoying as I thought she would be. But there's no denying I am not playing a Donkey Kong game to hear about her insecurities as a singer, as well as her constantly singing like a Disney princess whenever I have to transform into some monstrosity. Mercifully, you can turn off her singing during transformations. Again, if you're a preteen Disney girl, Pauline is the best thing that's ever happened in your life. But if you're an old man like me, this is just not what we want, especially as a rare Donkey Kong Country fan. I'd rather hear David Wise's beautiful compositions that are up there with the best music ever made, period, than this average 20-something-year-old singer portraying a 13-year-old singing some okay at best Disney ripoffs. You can play as Pauline in 2-player mode, but I'll be honest and say I never tried this out, so I can't comment on it. The new enemies are, frankly, not very appealing visually. I loved the last couple of levels because they featured DKC enemies, but it's definitely a Jungle Beat inspired game for 99% of the adventure. Still, there's only 2 DKC inspired bonus levels that I could come across in the world so far, which actually pisses me off a little bit. Why are the best parts of the game so few and far between? Shouldn't most of the games celebrate Donkey Kong's best moments? Another complaint is, at least so so far, I haven't encountered Funky Kong or any other Kongs except for the obvious Cranky, Diddy, and Dixie, and of course, the new enemies. I wasn't kidding when I said Pauline takes up the majority of game time. Make no mistake, this is a Pauline game with a new and not so improved redesign of Donkey Kong as her escort. I didn't like that the Bananza transformations essentially replaced all the animal buddies, except for Rambi for one mediocre racing segment. To me, this is like making the world smaller, where Donkey Kong is literally the only character you can control, not including Pauline. Why should Donkey Kong be like an ostrich? Why not ride Espresso? I understand it's more convenient from a gameplay perspective to simply transform at will, but Donkey Kong Country has always had a realistic, lived-in world as a selling point, where gameplay wasn't always the absolute most important thing. There are tons, and I do mean tons, of Mario influences here that are not necessarily for the best if you're a rare Donkey Kong Country fan. Let me clarify, if you're just a Mario fan, or you don't care that much about rare Donkey Kong, then many of my complaints won't matter to you. That's fine, but as a hardcore rare DK fan, these things do matter. If you approach the game like it's a regular, generic 3D collectathon with influences from Dig Dug or Mr. Driller, Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Rampage, and maybe even Knack for the PlayStation, then this is a great game. And even as a rare DK fan, you'll probably enjoy the game thanks to its amazing portrayal of the final boss, as well as some much-needed references to DKC games. However, from a gameplay perspective, I think Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze are much more faithful to the spirit of rare Donkey Kong. Yes, not in terms of references, but in terms of the DNA or genes of older Rare games. This is clearly a Japanese-developed Mario Odyssey team production. That's not necessarily bad, but it's not what I wanted from a Donkey Kong game. And I'm fearful that this is the style of Donkey Kong game we're going to get from now on. For example, when I first played Breath of the Wild, I really did enjoy it. But after Tears of the Kingdom, I got sick of it as a Zelda fan who loves Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and all prior 3D Zelda games. While Donkey Kong Bananza is a great addition overall to the Switch 2's library, I hope it's a one-off for Donkey Kong, just like I hoped Breath of the Wild would be a one-off for Zelda. There are so many things you could do with a straight-up 3D Donkey Kong game on Donkey Kong Island. I'm not convinced that Bananza, a radical departure from the old DK gameplay, was necessary before attempting a more traditional 3D Donkey Kong game with actual minecart levels. Yeah, sorry, the minecart sections in Bananza weren't good enough, and real animal buddies and memorable villains outside of the final boss fights. Yeah, Voidco didn't really do anything for me, and neither did the weird new enemies. The gameplay hook of Bananza can appear again for some other Nintendo characters, or even new ones, but for me, I am hoping that the next DK game is more faithful in gameplay to the older rare Donkey Kong games. I doubt Nintendo will abandon the Bananza style for DK, both in gameplay and in design, but I suspect that many people will gradually, perhaps slowly, become sick of it, just like Breath of the Wild. Overall, I really enjoyed Bananza. If I close my eyes and think of it like a new IP with some DK styling and references. From that perspective, I would happily give this game an 8.5 out of 10. As a Donkey Kong game, that is much harder to rate, and I fear any rating I would give it based on that would result in people grabbing their banana torches. But I'll just go ahead and say I wasn't wrong about being fearful of Bananza not being like a Donkey Kong game. However, I was surprised at how fun the journey actually was. So, and I'm being sincere here, well done and congratulations to Nintendo for making a truly great game. And could we please have the old Donkey Kong back now? Please? Please?
Donkey Kong Bananza is out now for the Nintendo Switch 2, and a lot of people are already talking about it as a game of the year, but is that what I think about it? Let's go. Yes, this was a big game with a lot of question marks around it that we were all looking forward to for the Nintendo Switch 2. A lot of people questioning why Nintendo chose to launch the system with Mario Kart World and not Donkey Kong Bananza. The demos that we had back a few months ago with the Nintendo Switch 2 experience were pretty fun, but it's a very difficult game to kind of wrap your mind around if you only get snapshots, if you only jump in and bash through some environments, because although that is a key ingredient in the gameplay from start to finish in this title, there is a lot going on with this game. First of all, it's made by team members that worked on Super Mario Odyssey, so you can feel that pedigree as you're whipping around as Donkey Kong with Pauline on his shoulder. It does feel incredibly playful to sort of just test the systems and bash not only the environments, but also walking up to some of the different characters, some of the NPCs, and interacting with them, and also toggling some of the challenges that happen on the fly, and some of them that you activate by bashing on a barrel and then diving into the challenge to find bananas, because that's what the whole story here is. I love that the way that this game starts out is your objective is find bananas, and that's what you're doing. You're just going from stage to stage, from micro mission to micro mission, and collecting as many bananas to get the banana energy that will activate all of the bonanzas that give you all of these cool extra powers that are tied to these different animal variations that you accumulate along the way. And so what you're doing in the game is you're diving deep into sub-levels. You're chasing this villain named Void Kong, who has amassed a little collection of bad guys that you will encounter again and again as the adventure unfolds. But the boss fights are not really the story. The story of this game is the adventuring and exploration that you get to do. This is a game experience quite unlike any other in the Nintendo universe, although it borrows liberally from titles like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, Little Super Mario Galaxy kind of remnants in there as well. But that whole mechanic of bashing through everything, it evokes Minecraft, it evokes Dig Dug. I was talking with Lee from PNP Games, and he mentioned that Knuckles from the Sonic universe, it would have been awesome to have Knuckles do something like this, and he's so right about that. It really changes things up gameplay-wise, because on the fly, you are affecting the geometry, and you are just bashing through walls and diving and digging into tunnels and creating giant caves and caverns for you to explore, and you're always finding treasure chests and the prerequisite bananas, and also apples that will give you a little boost of health, and you're helping some of the NPCs with some of their missions and objectives. You're destroying poison pods, you're trying to change some really dangerous weather systems that might be affecting one of these sublevels, and each of these sublevels gives the designers a little bit of a different art style to kind of lean into as well. And so there's some moodiness, there's some tropical vibes in this. I think my favorite level in the game is this hamburger-themed amusement park with a roller coaster and a Ferris wheel. It's amazing. But there's lots of inventiveness and creativity all the way along. This is really a beautiful showcase for the power of the Nintendo Switch 2, because there is so much devastation, so much destruction. It's kind of like taking some of the flying materials of Astrobot and Ratchet and Clank games and sort of cranking the knob to 11, because you just cannot believe all of the voxel generated art that's flying around as you're bashing through walls and obstructions and just blasting away at some of the bad guys that will pounce on you and stuff. It's chaos. It's utter chaos. And honestly, the camera struggles a little bit sometimes to keep up with the madness. You struggle a little bit. I did. Especially because I was playing the game in handheld mode. I got the code as I was coming back from Europe, and so playing this game on the flight home, it made the flight go much faster, and it was super fun to escape into it. But I have to tell you, it was a little bit difficult for me to comprehend all of this visual madness that I was looking at on the smaller screen. This is really a game meant for sitting at home on a big screen television, sharing it with somebody else, because there is a co-op mode as well, where they can just sort of destroy elements around you and with you as you're playing. But there's so much chaos and craziness on screen that it really benefits from having a larger display to kind of see everything run. And honestly, it runs very well. There are little moments of slowdown, you know, when there's tons and tons of debris flying all over the place and lightning might be going off and things. Sometimes it will sort of chop for a second, but Nintendo was pretty upfront that that might happen from time to time. And it didn't really kind of break the experience or the gameplay. You're just kind of in awe that all of this stuff is happening at the same time. And I think that might be one of the challenging elements with showcasing this game for other people. Like when you play Breath of the Wild or show it off to somebody, or Super Mario Odyssey and you show it off to somebody, there's some crazy stuff in both of those titles, but there is this openness to it and a spaciousness to it, using iconography that we're all very familiar with. Donkey Kong, it kind of, even though this is a character and a beloved character, and there are echoes of the Rare games in here and echoes of the retro games in here, this is kind of like carving out a new category. Even though Nintendo has done this 3D action adventure platformer style gameplay many times before, we haven't had this mobility, this speed, and this kind of functionality before, where you're really just determining what the end result of the level is going to look like after you've finished all of your madness, after you've pulverized everything. It's going to look very different than from when you started. And man, it's so compulsive to just bash everything, because you know Nintendo has buried secrets everywhere, and you do pick up maps and things like that to kind of help you find everything, but there are bananas everywhere, there are coins everywhere, there are power-ups everywhere, and of course the currency in the game allows you to customize your look a little bit. But man, this game is beautiful, it's charming, it's fast, and also extraordinary is the music that accompanies everything. There are echoes of previous Donkey Kong themes in the game. You collect records, and music is a big part of it because Pauline is always singing to help Donkey Kong transform into these different animal creations, an ostrich, a zebra that can run super fast. You can sort of power up and armor up Kong so he's a tougher ape, which is really fun. The ostrich can hover for a little bit. Super fun to get these Bonanza powers, and collecting the different currencies that are in the game is addictive as well. There's a lot of gold that you're finding, and so your eyes, at least my eyes, are like, whoa, that's shiny. Let's go over there and let's bash all of that and collect all that gold so I can spend it here or use it as part of your Bonanza powers. So, I mean, the game is delivering on a ton of different levels. It is ridiculously fun. It is ridiculously fresh and inventive, even though Nintendo has tread in this territory with other titles many times before. This feels different, and it feels superb, and it's an excellent kind of out of the launch cannon for Nintendo Switch 2. It's another showcase game for why people made the leap to this console, and it's impressive as hell. I personally don't think it's as good as Super Mario Odyssey. I still preferred the way that it jumped from genre to genre, in addition to all of these different worlds that we went to. The look of everything completely changed, but we also went to 2D and bounced to 3D. It was the tip of the hat to the eras of Mario, and there was lots of connections to the vibe of the Galaxy games as well. So I prefer Super Mario Odyssey, and this is still not going to supplant The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild as my favorite Nintendo game, but it's excellent, and it's a must-play, and it's a must-pick up if you have the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm going to give Donkey Kong Bananza a 9 out of 10.
After 26 years, Nintendo has finally given us a new full 3D Donkey Kong adventure game, one that lets DK literally break out of his long-time 2D shell. It's Donkey Kong Bananza for the Nintendo Switch 2. Once again stepping away from King K. Rool and his gang of reptiles, this game throws Donkey Kong into a massive world underneath the Earth's crust, where he has to battle an evil corporation that has stolen a bunch of valuable Banandium gems. DK is joined by a little talking rock who turns out to be a 13-year-old Pauline. Yes, the same superstar singer from Super Mario Odyssey, which also makes this a successor/prequel to that game. And no, that's not a spoiler, since Nintendo themselves advertised her being in the game for at least a month before the game came out. Together, this unlikely pair have to push their way to the Earth's core to make both their wishes come true and stop the corporate villains. It's the kind of story you'd expect from a DK or a Mario game that delivers big spectacle and action set pieces and worlds for these two to traverse, which is really what you want from such an ambitious action-adventure game. Now, I have to say, I'm not a fan of the new art style they used for DK's face, but that nitpick aside, DK and his world all look great in 4K on the NS2. With the bright colors, shiny HD polish, smooth textures, and little details like DK's fur, all running on a smooth frame rate too. It looks a lot like Super Mario Odyssey, but with very noticeable visual improvements. Sound is also good, though with some curious choices. While everyone speaks in blurbs and subtitles as per the Donkey Kong usual, Pauline gets subtitles and full voice acting much like Odyssey. It did seem weird for a while, but it made more sense the more I thought about it. I mean, she's a human fish out of water surrounded by anthropomorphic animals. She's lucky she understands them at all. Aside from all that, the sound effects are really good on big and small levels. From the sounds of DK smashing everything around him to little things like Pauline's reactions. It's all supported by great music tracks that give a mix of the hip-hop style we know and love from DK, and more traditional action-adventure music and jazz-type music for Pauline. Not to mention the tribute to DK's first venture into 3D. The first obviously amazing thing about this game is the idea of huge worlds being contained underground and being so open that they have their own sky and winds, everything you see on the surface. This whole underground world is a lot like the Hollow Earth in Godzilla vs. Kong, or Journey to the Center of the Earth for you older viewers. The other big thing with gameplay mechanics is how much of your environment is destructible. In fact, the game is built around destruction. DK has different attacks in a forward punch, upward punch, and downward punch, plus ripping out part of a surface and smashing other things with it, or throwing it. With gyro aiming, I might add. While this is obviously used for combat, most of the time it's a big part of exploration, which makes all the destruction more fun, while at the same time less mindless than you might expect. As DK, you're encouraged to bash your way through ice, mountains, and caves of stone to make your way to an objective or find hidden items like fossils and bananas. DK's clap also gives a quick burst of radar to show you where important items are hidden, so you know to start punching your way there. All kinds of things can be found simply by smashing things and making new paths for yourself. Plus, DK's got this cool ability where you can surf chunks of land he pulled up. There's a lot of freedom in the gameplay, and that freedom only grows as you find Banandium gems, as 5 gems earns you 1 skill point used to unlock a new ability or improve one you already have. It's in kind of a skill tree form, but made as more of a chart so you don't have to fill in one skill to upgrade another, which makes this a more accessible feature to a wider gaming audience. I also have to point out that there's a lot of very imaginative level designs with some funky surfaces they came up with for this game. Yet there are enough indestructible and hazardous surfaces to prevent you from destroying everything and giving the game enough structure to still have good challenges. Some indestructible surfaces lead to clever platforming and climbing challenges that put your understanding of DK's controls and abilities to the test. Which leads me to another star of this game, Little Pauline, who after overcoming some stage fright, learns how to sing songs that give DK the power of Bonanza! These powers transform DK into big versions of animals so he can use their abilities for puzzles, combat, and platforming. They're really cool powers that are fueled by gold and large fruits you can find, and using them only gets more fun as you discover more. As part of that freedom, you can activate a Bonanza ability almost any time as long as you have your Bonanza bar filled up. And there are plenty of times these powers are useful, if not required. As DK's little sidekick, Teenage Pauline also gives quick tips as you play, mostly pointing out health items that appear. Her inclusion was not by accident either. Her singing is a great way to keep the music and rhythm a key part of the Donkey Kong experience, just as it's been for most of his games. But her inclusion is also part of this being a Super Mario Odyssey successor. That along with being able to buy alternate clothes for DK and Pauline that improve stats like resistance to hazards and ways to restore Bonanza energy and health. It all culminates to fun boss fights that are especially exciting with all the combat moves DK has. I didn't find most of the bosses all that challenging until I got towards the halfway point of the game. Not like most of the DK64 bosses. But even the easier ones I had fun pummeling. Nintendo somehow nailed that perfect balance here. While $70 is a little high for any game, hint hint industry, Donkey Kong Bananza definitely justifies a $60 price. It's also a nice change that DK gets the first big adventure game on the brand new Nintendo platform instead of Mario. It's a 3D Donkey Kong game that was well worth waiting for, and something every DK fan should play.
Most people were hyped when they saw the Donkey Kong Bananza trailers, and honestly, so was I. But now, after a few hours of actually playing this game, wow, Nintendo actually cooked this time. That's right, I know a lot of you guys clicked on this expecting a rant or some kind of what went wrong video, but the truth is, this game is amazing so far. And I don't see that changing the deeper I get into these caves. Donkey Kong Bananza feels like a mashup of other amazing Nintendo games, but every single piece is reimagined to make something fresh and fun. The team behind Mario Odyssey is back, and yeah, you can feel those Odyssey vibes instantly with this game. But what surprised me the most is this doesn't feel like a copy and paste of Mario Odyssey. It's a breath of fresh air in a gaming world that has felt a little stale and boring over the past few years. And Odyssey isn't the only game that influenced this masterpiece. I picked up stuff from the open world Zelda games and of course the classic Donkey Kong games. I noticed awesome little Easter eggs and references even in just the first hour of this game. From iconic songs to subtle little visual callbacks to past Donkey Kong games, this game feels like it has the love and legacy of the entire franchise and other Nintendo games all behind its back. Sure, there are some obvious ones, like bananas are basically this game's version of Power Moons from Mario Odyssey, but it goes way deeper than that. For example, Bonanza brings in its own version of shrines, just like in Breath of the Wild, but it puts a Donkey Kong twist on them. Some of these challenges are super difficult and some are super creative, and they don't feel boring in the slightest. I can already see people arguing that they're even better than the Zelda shrines. Then, there's stuff you might not even notice right away, like the climbing. It's got the same freeform feel as Breath of the Wild, except instead of slowly scaling a mountain and running out of stamina, Bonanza says, what if you could climb at 100 miles per hour forever with no stamina? Wouldn't that be fun? And they're right, it's super fun. I haven't even gotten to this part yet, but I know the game eventually lets you transform into different creatures. And that looks like Mario Odyssey's capping mechanic taken to the extreme. All these systems that are clearly inspired by Nintendo's other games, but they've been rebuilt to fit Donkey Kong's world in a way that feels fresh and not just reused. The most smashing part of Donkey Kong Bonanza is, well, you guessed it, it's the smashing. I thought the idea of destroying the world looked pretty cool in the trailers, but I honestly wasn't sold on it and I kind of figured it would get old pretty quick. And maybe it will get old eventually, but from the very beginning, smashing through the rocks and the terrain felt weirdly satisfying. There were so many ways to destroy things in this game, and I'm pretty sure I've only scratched the surface. You can punch forward, you can punch down, you can punch up, you can dive bomb into the ground, you can rip up boulders and throw them into things, or even surf on them like some kind of jungle Tony Hawk or something. And just when you think that maybe you've seen it all and it's going to start getting a little bit boring, you unlock new abilities in a skill tree. A skill tree in a Donkey Kong game. I mean, whoever thought we'd be saying that? The moment I leveled up my punch to level 2, I felt like I turned into Prime King Kong, just obliterating everything in my path more efficiently. It's chaotic, it's over the top, and that's what makes it so much fun. This game found a way to make pure destruction feel unbelievably satisfying. I don't know if anybody was really doubting this, but let's put it to rest anyway. The game is visually stunning. The colors are vibrant, the lighting is crisp, and the contrast just pops off the screen. The team already proved they know how to make a beautiful game with Mario Odyssey, and Bonanza is no different. I've only played the first few levels, and even within that handful of areas, the variety is overwhelming in the best way possible. It's like every level is dripping with different colors of the rainbow and new color combos to keep your eyes glued to the screen. Every level is showing off a new palette, and I'm all here for it. Except this green Donkey Kong skin. I have no idea who asked for this, but, you know, I guess somebody might like it. But seriously though, if this is how the game starts, I can't wait to see what those later levels might have in store. This wouldn't be a video on my channel if I didn't mention at least one flaw that I noticed, and for me, in this game, it's the camera. Most of the time, it's totally fine, but sometimes when you're in small caves or tight areas, it just gets really weird. Sometimes the game zooms out and gives you a cool little X-ray vision effect so you can see through the walls and see the caves around you. And when that happens, it's perfect. You stay oriented, you keep moving, no problem. But then other times it doesn't do that for some reason, and you're just staring at just dirt, totally disoriented, hopping around and just jumping everywhere, hoping you're going in the right direction. It's not game breaking or anything, it's just a little bit annoying when it happens. I really wish the game always defaulted to that zoomed out X-ray view when you're in a tight spot, because it clearly already has that in the game, so why not use it? The only other thing that might throw some people off is that this game is very, very different from the other Donkey Kong games we've had before. And I get it, Anytime a franchise this old changes direction, some fans are going to push back and just straight up hate it no matter what it is. But honestly, if you're one of those fans, I highly recommend giving this a shot. This game is gonna breathe new life into a franchise that's been stuck in the same place for a long time. This game is bold, fresh, and it's great. And if I'm being honest, this feels like Donkey Kong's version of Breath of the Wild. A complete reinvention that somehow still feels like it belongs to the franchise. In a time where the Switch 2 lineup was starting to look a little bleak and nobody really had many reasons to buy a Switch 2, if I'm being honest, they still don't. I mean, we're talking about 2 games at this point. But this game might have just bought Nintendo some time. We don't get a new Donkey Kong game very often, and when we do, it's usually just another classic side-scroller. And don't get me wrong, I love those games, like they're great. But this is something totally different. For the past decade, maybe even longer, Nintendo's been carried by Mario and Zelda hard. Donkey Kong's always been the side project, the if you have the extra time game. It's never been the must-buy game that Mario and Zelda has been for the past decade. But now, this might finally be Nintendo's big 3. Mario, Zelda, and the newly leveled up Donkey Kong back to claim his spot at the top with the big dogs. Let me know in the comments, is Donkey Kong Bananza exactly what this franchise needed? Or has it gone so far off the track that it shouldn't even be called Donkey Kong anymore?
It's an odd feeling playing Donkey Kong Bananza. On the one hand, it's a very direct follow-up to what this same team achieved in Super Mario Odyssey. It embraces the feel and elements of the structure from that game while attempting to address some of the weak points. On the other hand, it is also clear that Nintendo isn't starting fresh with Donkey Kong. In fact, Donkey Kong Bananza is perhaps more aware of its own gameplay and narrative lineage than most titles within the greater Marioverse. When an evil banana-stealing conglomerate, called Voidco, steals all of the giant Banandium gems from the mines where Donkey Kong is working, destruction sends DK tumbling into the dark below. Here he'll encounter a mysterious young girl named Pauline, who seems to have some role to play in Voidco's plot. Together they set off to reach the core of the world, where legend tells of a power that can grant their greatest wishes, be it infinite bananas or simply returning home. Donkey Kong Bananza plays out as a mostly linear series of levels. There is one point at which you'll be able to choose which order in which to play through a couple of areas, but it's an oddly one-off scenario and then it's back to a single course. While each level constitutes a layer of the planet's crust, the scale of each layer varies wildly. Some are small little contained environments, while others contain multiple sub-layers and biomes. This does at times feed into an uneven feeling in the game's pacing. You may spend hours in one layer only to plow through the next one in 10 minutes. It almost felt like the team had a large list of level ideas but was only permitted time to invest fully in half of them. That being said, each layer generally presents its own unique gameplay and hazards. Uniting each layer is DK's ability to punch his way through almost everything. Layers are made up of unique materials that all have specific qualities in terms of how they interact with DK and each other. For example, concrete is particularly difficult to destroy, often requiring some extra force from a more explosive material, while sand and dirt may actually stick to other surfaces, allowing you to create structures with them. There are, of course, a few surfaces that simply can't be destroyed, but most surfaces you'll encounter can be dug through, smashed, or picked up and hurled across the level. DK's moveset in general has a fantastic feeling of momentum to it. He can attack forward, up, or down, in addition to climbing, ripping material out of the ground or wall, jumping, rolling, swimming, and even surfing on chunks of the environment. It's something this team achieved extremely well in Super Mario Odyssey, and they've clearly brought that fluid and chainable movement system to Donkey Kong Bananza. Adding to DK's moveset are the slowly unlocked Bananza transformations. These are earned from larger layers by helping the various animal elders. Each one has specific traits. For example, the first one, a larger gorilla form, gives DK a super-powered punch that can blast through all but the absolute toughest materials. A little later, you'll get one that will allow you to glide, or one that lets you move faster. These forms have to be charged up by collecting gold, but gold is so plentiful that I generally had a new charge ready well before the prior charge had actually worn out. Exploring layers yields Banandium gems, interchangeably just called bananas. These can be found lying around, earned by helping NPCs, or won in challenge stages. Challenge stages are presented as hidden ruin chambers and constitute both the best and worst of what Donkey Kong Bananza has to offer. Sometimes you'll enter a ruin and be presented with a fun and original platforming challenge or puzzle to solve. Oftentimes, this will test your mastery of understanding how the different materials within the ground interact with each other. A few even recreate environments from prior Donkey Kong titles, offering some nice 2D nostalgia alongside the challenge. Unfortunately, just as often, you'll simply be asked to fight a few enemies. Enemy variety gets better as the game goes, but at no point is it a strength, so you'll fight the same club-wielding rock monsters a lot. These areas remind me of the shrines in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. Like in those titles, the challenges built around using your knowledge of the game are excellent, but those that simply ask you to fight the same enemy repeatedly are a disappointment every time they pop up. Bananas earned gradually feed into skill points. Skill points are then used to upgrade DK's ability. It is worth highlighting that unlike most 3D Marios, or even Donkey Kong's previous 3D platforming excursion in Donkey Kong 64, these primary collectibles do not gate progression. In fact, by the late game, as I had my skill tree largely filled out, my desire to delve into challenge stages to earn extra bananas started to wane, and by the end, I was just knowingly walking past them. To be honest, the skill tree system feels like a justification for having giant bananas to collect, rather than a natural and necessary game mechanic. Nothing would be lost by simply allowing DK to get stronger via progression through the game, other than the absence of an opportunity to say "oh banana" every few minutes to prove that yes, we do all remember Donkey Kong 64, even if there are parts that we'd rather forget. Beyond bananas, you'll also earn Banandium chips, small chunks of banana, gold, and fossils of 3 rarities, each of which is unique to every layer. The chips can be combined into a single banana. Fossils unlock outfits for DK and Pauline that have various boons, and gold unlocks things like rest points and barrel cannons. With the exception of fossils, which are legitimately hidden throughout each level, you will have more gold and chips than you know what to do with within an hour of starting the game. The fact that chips in particular can be traded in for bananas further obfuscates the drive to collect bananas. It feels like 2 or more of these currencies could have been combined to increase demand on them and thus make them more of a legitimate progress gate. As is, by the first time I was asked for 100 gold, I had already accrued more than 10,000 of it. Now those nitpicks aside, did I joyously wander through piles of dirt looking for bananas? Yes, I did. Because while the actual collectible system can be critiqued at a game design level, the simple joy of engaging with it is hard to ignore. Even in the few areas where it awkwardly stumbles, this is just an incredibly endearing game to play. While at a glance, Donkey Kong Bananza presents a similar looking set of worlds to Super Mario Odyssey, the technical feature set on offer is indeed a generational leap ahead. The fact that this was ever even considered as a Switch 1 title is remarkable, given the scale of what they wound up doing. I have seen other games build destructible environments out of voxels, but never with the density, flexibility, variability, and material diversity of Donkey Kong Bananza. While the game does occasionally drop from its target frame rate of 60 frames per second, I could always clearly see why. Particularly in the late game, the level of absolute chaos during some boss fights is unlike anything I have ever seen before. I do wonder if a lower resolution mode or a 120Hz 40 frames per second mode could alleviate some of these bottlenecks. But when it comes down to it, this is just a deceptively technically demanding game. As a follow-up to Super Mario Odyssey, Donkey Kong Bananza is a fascinating experiment. It attempts to solve that game's progression issues caused by giving the player so many moons that in actuality there really were no progress gates related to the moons, by making the primary collectible unrelated to actual progression. It arguably creates some new issues in the process, but is, if nothing else, an acknowledgement that there is room to improve on the formula. And all of that so quickly falls aside as you flow through these richly crafted worlds. On the other hand, if we take as a basis of comparison Donkey Kong 64, then Donkey Kong Bananza is a monumental improvement. The relationship between DK and Pauline develops into something pretty heartwarming by the end, and the story goes places I wouldn't have dreamed. I don't want to spoil anything here, but the phrase "oh hell yes" was shouted multiple times by me during the final hours before rolling credits. Donkey Kong Bonanza tries a lot of new ideas, and the vast majority of them not only work, but revolutionize the underlying idea of a 3D platformer. Now, there are definitely problems along the way, and this is a long way from perfect, but I can't argue with how much pure fun there is to be had in playing Donkey Kong Bonanza.
I haven't played a Donkey Kong game in a long time. I beat Donkey Kong Country a few years ago, and before that, it was actually Barrel Blast for the Wii when I was actually making a review for it. I've never played the N64 title, so this will be my first 3D platforming Donkey Kong game. The story is about how DK is a part of a mining operation, digging for gold and bananas, which are actually called Banandium gems. After finding one, a gigantic molten boulder seems to come out of nowhere and causes a violent tempest which sucks the bananas and crew members, including DK, towards the boulder, which sinks deep into the ground. After a multitude of events take place, DK meets up with a strange talking rock who turns out to be Pauline from Mario Odyssey, only as a teenager. As she begins to sing, this helps DK transform into his Kong Bananza. In this form, DK gains strength for a limited time, which can help him break through tough objects like concrete with ease. The point of the game is to travel to the core of the planet. In doing so, you'll land in many different layers, all of which have their own theme, puzzles, obstacles, enemies, and of course, bananas. If you've played Super Mario Odyssey before, you'll recognize the similarities of gameplay mechanics in this game. That isn't to say it's a clone, but seeing how both games were developed by the same studio team, there are definitely likenesses between both games, and apparently Tears of the Kingdom as well. You know what would have sucked, other than the giant molten boulder? It's if the game had a time limit. Thank goodness it doesn't, because just exploring each layer is super fun. DK's strength comes in handy with this, as he can smash his way through almost any terrain. Doing so will let you find gold pockets, fossils, treasure chests, and bananas. Gold is important, as some NPCs called fractones require it if you want to open up certain challenges or create barrel shortcuts. It's also needed to create getaways, private rooms to relax and take a nap in. I liked how the getaways would become more aesthetically inviting, and the bed became more comfortable as you increased the number of getaways in the same layer. As you settle down for a bit, Pauline would talk to DK about various things, which could be about her life, or the layer itself, or whatever. It was charming to say the least. Besides currency, gold is also needed to regenerate your Bananergy, which lets you transform into a Bonanza state. Thankfully, you don't need much gold to do so, and even if you don't have enough, you can still transform by using cans of melon juice in your inventory. Gaining gold isn't difficult, especially if you just love to dig around the layer. You'll lose 500 gold if you get hit too many times, or fall off a ledge and don't have any balloons to save you. Even though most fractones don't require much gold to perform an action, this tree fractone is quite greedy and will eat up a lot. Reminds me of the Luma that love to eat starbits in Galaxy. Bananas are arguably the main item you'll want to find. After finding 5 of them, you'll gain a skill point to use in a modest skill tree. Many of the skills are unavailable at first, but this is because they apply to other Bonanza transformations. Speaking of, the Zebra Bonanza lets you run at fast speeds, great for crossing crumbling platforms or running across water. The Ostrich Bonanza lets you fly around for a bit and glide through the air. There are more Bonanzas than this, and each one is fun to use in the right situations. The terrain isn't just for smashing through. You can pick up chunks and swing them against enemies, or even hazardous brambles to destroy them. You can also go chunk surfing, especially helpful against lava, and non-stone terrain can stick together, helping you create your own bridges to difficult-to-reach areas. Throughout each layer, you'll find locked challenge doors. Using Pauline's powerful voice can unlock these, and each one contains an A to B platforming stage where the goal is to find up to 3 bananas. The first is pretty simple to find, the second is more difficult, and the third can sometimes be quite the head-scratcher. It's best to upgrade your sonar ability in your skill tree, as this can help you find the bananas through walls. In addition, it can also help you find fossils around a layer. These are used as currency in exchange for different outfits for you and Pauline, and each one provides a unique bonus. You can also use fossils in exchange for new DK fur colors, but these are purely cosmetic only. The treasure chest can hold various items, including fossil maps. You can pin fossils or certain points of interest on the map, which was nice, although I wish you could have zoomed in more on the map itself. The graphics look fantastic. Everything is vibrant and colorful, and the draw distance was usually really good, although there were instances of objects rendering deep into the background. I especially like the attention to detail of the objects, such as how these leaves look like orangutans, or how this hill looks like a monkey face. The frame rate stayed at a consistent 60 FPS when docked. However, unfortunately, when there was just a ton of graphical assets on screen, the FPS noticeably dipped, and this is especially true for the final boss, where certain points dropped to about 15 FPS. I'd say at least 95% of the time, though, the frame rate stayed consistently up. The controls were pretty much perfect. I liked how X was used to punch up, and B was used to punch down. This felt natural, as the punch directions mimicked the face buttons on the controller. There's a two-player mode where the second player can use Pauline to shout word chunks at enemies in the terrain. This also came in handy if you wanted to quickly dig out a tunnel. It's pretty fun, but I prefer single player. The music was either meh or amazing. The themes of the layers were honestly forgettable, but the Bananza themes were awesome. My favorite is the Kong Bananza. The boss fights were unfortunately too easy. Like, really too easy. If you want to give yourself a challenge, don't transform, although some require you to do so. It wasn't until far into the game did the boss fights actually become challenging. Now, even though most are easy, a lot of them are still fun and mix things up a bit like this one. I will say that the final boss fight was fantastic. So much so that it alone has bumped up my score for the game at the end of the video. You can gain certain items or terrain textures with Amiibo, and as of this video, I don't have the DK and Pauline Amiibo. My Zelda theme Amiibo get me these giant stone boulders, which is a thing, I guess? There's an artist mode where you can carve and paint different statues to your liking. I honestly have zero interest in this, but it's here for those who would enjoy it. There were a few glitches I ran into, mostly graphical, that didn't really hurt anything, although there were a couple instances where it would look like I picked up a chunk of a certain terrain, but instead I got a different type, which was odd and frustrating. DK and Pauline's journey to the center of the planet is packed with adventure. It's so satisfying to just break through terrain with ease, and using the different abilities of the Bananza states is really fun. I will say that there was a point where my level of fun plateaued, and I was just ready to get to the end. Fortunately, this was near the end of the game, and the final boss reinvigorated my spirit, and I beat the game on a positive note. And, because the final boss was so much fun, I decided to bump up the score 1/4 point. So therefore, this game gets a 4.5 out of 5 with the title of Epic.
A new 3D platformer coming to us from the teams behind Super Mario Odyssey is a big deal. Odyssey is arguably the greatest 3D platformer of all time, with boundless creativity and an abundance of mechanical perfection and player expression. What does a new game from this team even look like? How incredible would it be? Would it be better than Odyssey? Is that even a fair expectation to have? Regardless of whether or not it's fair, it's clear that it's going to be the immediate comparison for many who play Donkey Kong Bananza, the first new 3D platformer from the Odyssey team since the game's release almost 8 years ago. And the more you play Bananza, the more it becomes evident that the developers understood this fact, and that they may have even taken it as a challenge upon themselves to deliver something even more wildly ambitious and impressive than that game. Because Bananza takes upon Odyssey's incredible framework and structure, and then builds on it, tweaks it, and even breaks it to put its own stamp on the new 3D platformer genre, and evolves it in altogether new ways. There is an argument to be made that Bananza is the greatest 3D platformer Nintendo has ever released, which is almost unrealistically, hyperbolically, high praise. And yet, it is true. Donkey Kong Bananza is such a staggeringly inventive and incredible game with such fantastic design where, in spite of the endless capacity for nearly unrestrained player expression, it always feels like the developer anticipated and preempted your actions, responding to pretty much any player input with a permissive yes, and rewarding them for thinking outside the bounds of traditional 3D game design. The signature mechanic to the game that characterizes this more than anything else is, of course, the destructibility. Pretty much everything that you see in the game can be grabbed, torn off, smashed, punched through, and destroyed in any number of ways. This leads to an incredibly unique 360-degree style of traversal and movement that most platformers, even 3D platformers, simply don't have. Platformers are defined by very strongly outlined limitations, how fast a character can go, how far they can jump, and so on. Bananza dispenses with this almost entirely, letting DK burrow into anything, anywhere. In combination with his ability to climb any surface without limitation, no stamina meter to keep track of, this means that you can go almost anywhere within the 3D space of the levels, something the game anticipates and seems to outright expect, given how many rewards and collectibles are hidden in this manner that would feel almost impossibly out of way in any other game. This might sound like it undermines the deliberate design that one might expect from a good 3D platformer, but as mentioned, that never feels the case, and the game always seems to have anticipated how the player will engage with the world and manages to nudge and guide them to the direction where their efforts and curiosity will be rewarded. It also helps that the actual action of destruction is so versatile. You aren't limited to just punching and smashing through things, but you can pick things up, throw and hurl them at other things or distant targets, swing broken chunks into enemies and obstacles, and even use it for all sorts of movement tech, including tearing off a chunk and using it as a makeshift platform to double jump off of, or using it to skateboard on, smashing into enemies or obstacles along the way and causing even more destruction in your wake. Destruction feels almost reductive as a descriptor here then, with how endlessly expressive this action seems to be. You can throw explosive things to cause explosions, you can punch through terrain, and how strong it is and how strong your blow is determines how much you destroy. The verb of destroying therefore feels infinitely mutable, and allows for a kind of movement-based level design that is unlike anything seen in a platformer yet. The fact that the actual feel of controlling DK through his heavy movements and smashing through everything is so immaculate and responsive to player input only serves to make the action feel even more enjoyable to engage with every chance you get. Engaging with it is where the true genius of Bananza's design comes into play. Even without destroying anything, Bananza gives players a fun sandbox with lots to discover and places to poke around in. But the more you destroy, the more you discover, with some of the best challenges and areas of the game hidden under the seemingly unassuming surface. I say seemingly unassuming because Bananza uses excellent visual cues to guide the player's eye. This can be something as simple as a slight crack or bump for you to investigate, but owing to the unique nature of Bananza's design, you get more, including a sonar that highlights things hidden and buried in your immediate vicinity, and treasure maps that you can find frequently as you dig around, and which highlight the locations of valuable collectibles in the level. All put together then, the game creates this excellent, incredible loop where it's leading the player along via visual cues, resulting in them destroying things, resulting in them getting rewards that then lead to the next visual cue, and so on. You can lose literally hours to Donkey Kong Bananza and not even realize it. Even the earlier levels in the game are endlessly complex and stuffed with rewards for the enterprising player. And the latter ones are ambitious and impressive. Many of them could have gotten away with being entire games by themselves. You're not just destroying things either, as Donkey Kong Bananza is practically an action-adventure game with how comprehensive and varied its gameplay outside of the core platforming tends to be. Exploring the various subterranean layers that you find yourself on leads you to finding not just rewards, but also currency, NPCs who will give you quests, entire villages and settlements with different kinds of stores to buy helpful gear and items from. Connecting the central collectible of the game, the Banandium Gems, which are the equivalent of moons in Odyssey, has another benefit for the player, as collecting 5 of them nets you 1 skill point that can be used to unlock perks and skills from a skill tree. These can be as simple as leveling up your health and your attack to unlocking entirely new skills and tech, such as the ability to surf over bodies of water on a chunk of stone. The multiple different kinds of collectibles, as well as the central collectibles also feeding into a skill tree, address the singular core issue that many had with Mario Odyssey, and even other Nintendo titles such as Breath of the Wild. The fact that every action in the game led to the exact same kind of reward meant that many were disincentivized from engaging with parts of the game. The fact that there are so many different kinds of rewards here, usually scaling to the degree of effort that they require from the player and able to be leveraged in other different ways, such as exchanging for gear or upgrading your skills, means the game is a lot better at dangling the promise of a meaningful reward for the player than several other of Nintendo's make-your-own-fun School of Design titles have done. For players who want more traditional platforming challenges, however, Bananza still delivers. Its sandboxes are littered with self-contained areas with themed challenges that you can take on for a reward, and can involve everything from destruction, combat, traversal, to some good old-fashioned hardcore platforming. There's a near-endless supply of these challenges in the world, and they always manage to surprise. Those mini-challenge areas are framed in what becomes increasingly more elaborate and inventive sandbox levels the further down into the earth you burrow. Every level in the game is a whole new subterranean layer, and while things start out fairly vanilla in terms of theming, soon they go off the rails and lead to some truly out there and varied aesthetics and their implementation on gameplay mechanics. This, of course, should always come as a surprise to no one. It's something Nintendo in general has always been great at, and this team in particular flexed this skill hard with Super Mario Odyssey. Seeing it return here bigger and better tracks. Bananza represents the next step for Nintendo platformers, not just in terms of mechanics and design, however. Surprisingly enough, it also is the next step for Nintendo platformers narratively. Surprisingly enough, Bananza is a far more story-focused game than not just any other Nintendo platformer to date, but most in-house Nintendo titles in general. The story starts out simple, but the stakes escalate steadily through the game's substantial campaign, with the finale and everything leading up to it in particular standing out as absolutely legendary. A lot of the game's narrative heft comes not necessarily from the story as much as the focus on the characters and their pathos, particularly Donkey Kong and the talented young singer Pauline, whom he finds himself accompanying in her quest to get back home to the surface. Mercifully enough, Nintendo has also, in recognition of the game's heftier narrative, gone all in on the storytelling and production values. This is a fully voice-acted game, although Pauline, as the only human character, is the only one who speaks a human language. Everyone else is speaking some made-up animal gibberish. That gibberish still sounds charming and emotive, although it is Pauline's performance that steals the show here. To Nintendo's credit, Pauline's voice has been dubbed in every single language the game supports, which extends to not just her dialogue, but every one of the songs that she sings as well. DK and Pauline partnering in the story also leads to the game's most surprising mechanic, the eponymous Bananzas. These are essentially time-limited transformations for DK that occur when Pauline sings. Yeah, really. And enhance in physical prowess. You unlock multiple different Bananzas as you play the game, and their abilities range from boosting your speed to giving you flight to letting you hit things a lot harder and more. Bananza can be activated anywhere with no limitation, and different kinds can be chained together with zero cooldown as well, allowing you to start chaining together some seriously impressive moves and movement tech. Bananzas can also be powered up by the skill tree, making the skill points that you get via Banandium gems that much more valuable. Donkey Kong Bananza is one of the first games exclusive for the Nintendo Switch 2, and does a pretty good job of showing off the system's various capabilities and features. At 1440p, it runs at a far higher resolution than anything the previous generation Switch could manage, and the game's level density, geometry, and complexity is far beyond Super Mario Odyssey. It runs at an impressive mostly locked 60 FPS through all the mayhem, and there is so much mayhem that players will wreak. Things generally look good, though the game's stylized visuals definitely not going to appeal to everyone, particularly when it comes to the character designs. It makes a good case for the system's VRR ability in portable mode, smoothing over these aforementioned drops when they do happen a lot better in handheld mode than in TV mode. It shows off the mouse functionality of the Joy-Cons extremely well, in the new Mario Paint style sculpting toolkit it gives players, and even leverages the enhanced HD rumble in the Switch 2 and its controllers with great haptic feedback as you smash your way through the levels. One part of the game that merits a special shout is the camera. This is something that can feel almost off-puttingly poor for the first-time players digging underground, particularly if you attempt to manipulate it the same way as the camera in any other game. However, the more you come to grips with it, the more it reveals itself to be an extremely smart camera that allows for full 360 movement in cramped quarters without letting the player lose sight of where DK is, and where the camera is framing things from. Designing a camera that works well in a game like Bananza can't have been easy. Typically, you don't get many third-person games that focus on movement, allow 360 traversal, and take place in very cramped and confined quarters. even something like Minecraft or Deep Rock Galactic, which involves near-free movement in cramped underground areas, are first-person, meaning there is zero separation between controlling the character and controlling the camera, something that isn't true for third-person games like Bonanza. It can definitely take a couple of hours to stop fighting the camera, but when you do, it becomes almost reflexive, and you can get it to do what you need it to do without even thinking about it. Every now and then, Nintendo releases a new game that shows off why, in spite of all the backlash the company can generate from its business decisions, it is considered one of the finest developers around. A title that demonstrates an immaculate understanding of the craft of making games, a game that has an innate, inherent knack to be compelling and engaging for the players almost effortlessly, to the degree that few other games or developers are able to exhibit. Donkey Kong Bonanza is such a game, staggering in its scope and ambition, towering in its variety, and nearly immaculate in its execution. Bonanza lays a credible claim to being the best platformer Nintendo has ever made, and arguably, their best game this side of Breath of the Wild. The Switch 2 has its first killer app.
To properly encapsulate our feelings on Donkey Kong Bonanza, you almost have to start at the finish. No spoilers here, obviously, but this game could have one of the finest finales of any Nintendo game ever. There's a delightful build-up of adrenaline as story beats and experimental mechanical evolutions are gleefully layered atop each other. It's difficult not to have a great big smile on your face as the game hurtles towards its finish. It's pretty masterfully done. Bonanza's late-game spectacle feels like a direct descendant of Mario Odyssey's wedding set-piece, but also exactly the sort of thing that its new-to-Nintendo project lead might bring to the table. Bonanza's director is one Kazuya Takahashi, whose most notable previous work was on Final Fantasy XV, another game big on spectacle. Some of that Final Fantasy predilection for flair is present here, in a sense, married to a very Nintendo love for a mechanical climax over a narrative one. So yes, that finale is something special. Your feet will tap to the music during climactic fights, and you'll laugh out loud at some of the creative audacity on display. But en route to that finale, well, things aren't always quite as memorable. You see, when it smashes, DK really smashes. When it doesn't, well, it's no Odyssey, right? Despite this, the foundations of Bonanza are excellent, and at the heart of those is the game's destruction tech, which essentially lets DK demolish the world around him. You can't completely flatten a level, the broad framework is set out in unbreakable material, quite often metal girders reminiscent of the original Donkey Kong's backgrounds, but vast swathes of the terrain can be obliterated. The whole game is built around this design. At its most basic, you might pummel your way into the ground or the side of a mountain to find a hidden collectible, which are plentiful. On a deeper level, you're thinking about how these materials interact. There's a hierarchy of hardness. Oh, so that means that stone will smash thorny terrain or mountains made of dirt or sand to bits, but if you want to break down concrete, you'll need a chunk of something harder, like obsidian to hand. In the same way that Breath of the Wild is the first truly post-Skyrim Nintendo game, that is to say, one which takes in the design success of an earth-shattering rival, DK Bonanza can undoubtedly be thought of as Nintendo's latest post-Minecraft effort. But as ever with Nintendo, emulation is not enough. Everything must be pushed that little bit further. These materials are not just about breaking down the environment then, but they are also key to enemy encounters. Each of the foes you come into contact with can appear in forms related to many of the materials, turning this tiering into a factor in combat. An enemy made from obsidian will need careful thought to defeat. One covered in thorny terrain will be impossible to punch without getting hurt, but easily crushed with another material. An enemy crafted from the highly explosive boom rock is best viewed not as a threat, but as a walking bomb, perfect to help carve out a new nook in the environment, or defeat another enemy with a friendly fire explosion. On and on it goes, with fascinating results. As more materials with properties beyond hardiness are introduced, the considerations intensify. Using the right material in the right way can open up new areas, or make previously challenging encounters a breeze. In boss encounters especially, materials fly and interact with such ferocity that on a few occasions the frame rate slowed to a crawl, just like when you detonate too many chunks of TNT at once in Minecraft. It speaks to how cool these systems can be that the brief technical breakdown is instantly forgiven. Systems colliding like that are well worth a bit of slowdown. The open-ended Odyssey-style design, where hundreds of collectibles await you, means that many puzzling tasks can be completed either with their prescribed solution or by thinking wildly outside the box. All of these materials also interact with DK's transformations, where he can temporarily take on the form of another animal, like a zebra. These are the titular Bananzas. By the late game, you're juggling it all, ripping up chunks of ground to surf on or smash enemies with, then triggering a transformation, and then seamlessly switching between transformations to dodge attacks and weave through environmental hazards, then quickly puzzling out the most efficient way to forge a path forwards. It really does satisfy. At the same time, though, it sometimes flounders. Bananza sees DK and new pal Pauline on a journey to the centre of the planet, which means you're digging down. Bananza's equivalent of a world is a layer, and rather than various forms of rock, each layer is a pretty traditional video game land. It ticks the biome boxes, mines, jungles, beaches, more fantastical offerings. It's all here, and the flow of the game is impressive, moving between dramatic, combat-heavy layers and lovely, breezy chill-outs, although it is let down by a few layers that feel like pure filler. Swings and roundabouts and all that. How about the concerns then that Bananza's smashing mechanic might not be enough to hold the player's interest over a full game? Well, doubters can rest easy because each layer introduces new materials and new lenses through which to consider DK's destructive power. You're bequeathed a pretty much constant flow of new stuff to do. Strangely, this can give the opposite problem, where there's all this stuff, but a lot of it feels underused. Brilliant ideas are presented, and you can't wait to see how that mechanic will evolve, and then it just doesn't. This is somewhat of a theme. DK's transformations, for instance, each have a specific utility. Many puzzles will require one or another of the Bananza forms to solve. By that same token, a good third of the available transformations have extremely limited usefulness. A skill tree system provides useful skill unlocks for DK himself, but many of the skill upgrades for the Bananza forms feel pretty pointless. One form in particular bucks the trend though. Maxed out, it is a game-breaking, world-shattering monster, which is a good thing, but that only serves to underline the anemic nature of some of the others. And there are nitpicks beyond this. Little grumbles that are by themselves small but add up to a broader feeling that Bananza squeaks just shy of being an all-timer. For example, the way the destruction tech works means that sometimes tiny bits of material can be left behind, and then they are very difficult to destroy. This is fine most of the time, but in the late game there's a heck of a lot of super deadly health-sapping terrain. Miss a tiny piece of this and then walk into it mid-boss battle and whoops, you're dead. Speaking of boss battles, most if not all boss encounters here are repeated. Materials get swapped and all that, but when even big story bosses are trotted out multiple times, it feels a bit rote. This bit feels like a hangover from Mario, who always has boss repetition, but Bananza's bosses are of a different stripe to Mario's three-hit wonders. These are puzzly, spectacle-driven fights. It's more like if a Zelda made you fight every dungeon boss twice. Even with these complaints, however, it's hard to put the controller down when you're deep in the game. The time just absolutely melts away, and this will keep you moving through the story even when events feel like they're sagging. Past the halfway point, things really begin to motor, to the point where, after seeing the credits roll, most people should still want to keep playing due to its offering of post-game challenges. Perhaps that is where Donkey Kong Bananza best sits. It's not the sort of seminal, mega wow game that Odyssey was, but it is exactly the sort of experience where you can slip into a trance-like autopilot, your brain syncing up with the game's design, and time just disappears. If it were possible to look up sticky game design in the dictionary, it'd probably flag up a picture of Bananza. It's also pretty good at tugging at the heartstrings in a way. This is a silly story about an ape and a little girl, but it's surprisingly heartfelt. Pauline's eager encouragement, communicated with a range of vocal barks as you smash your way through challenges, has the potential to become cloying, but instead she endears herself. There's loads of great moments in story cutscenes, but there's also cute animation ticks and lovely bits of dialogue whenever DK takes a nap at a rest stop to restore his health. There's the sort of heart here that Mario has only ever dreamed of. In summary then, when Bananza smashes, it is totally remarkable. Occasionally it feels like it gets a bit lost or fails to expand on some of the excellent foundations it's laying down, which is the sort of thing that keeps a game from being declared as a total classic. But even with these quibbles, it nevertheless earns a hearty, full-throated recommendation from us.
There is no Mario without Donkey Kong, as both characters made their debut in 1981, forever changing the video game industry. Even though Mario came out to be Nintendo's golden boy, DK would still get his own games, from Donkey Kong Country, 64, and who could forget Jungle Beat. That said, ever since Tropical Freeze was released in 2014, it seems like Nintendo didn't know what to do with the character aside from a few remasters, a movie appearance, and a theme park. That's good and all, but Donkey Kong fans have been waiting patiently for a new game, and we now have just that on Nintendo Switch 2 with Donkey Kong Bananza, the first 3D game in the series since 64 in 1999. This marks a bold new era for the ape, and who better to handle this game than the Super Mario Odyssey development team at Nintendo EPD. So, was DK's new 3D adventure worth the 11-year wait? We're going to answer that in our brutally honest review. The game begins with our hairy protagonist in a place called Ingot Isle, home to Banandium gems, which are essentially crystallized bananas. And we know Donkey Kong can't resist his bananas. While he's searching for them, an evil mining company called Voidco suck up all the Banandium gems to power their meteor ship, pushing Ingot Isle underground. DK, now below the surface, finds a sentient rock being who joins him on his journey and is later revealed to be a young Pauline, who would later grow up to be the mayor of New Donk City in Super Mario Odyssey. Now, the duo must team up to find these Banandium gems throughout multiple sub-layers leading to the Earth's core, and they must take on Voidco using DK's powerful strength and Pauline's magical voice, the latter of which will transform him into various animals. Like most Nintendo platformers, story is not the main focus, but the most endearing part of it all is Pauline's friendship with DK. Although he remains a silent protagonist, Pauline is fully voiced, and during rest stop visits, she will occasionally interrupt DK's nap to discuss their adventure, the current setting, and share personal details about herself. All of these one-sided conversations portray her as a sweet and lovable character, and she has a sweet little moment at the end of the game, which we won't spoil here. All we will say is that the Super Mario Odyssey team really knows how to craft a magnificent climax of epic proportions. Speaking of Odyssey, the gameplay loop of Donkey Kong Bananza is quite similar to it. DK is thrown into a variety of sandbox levels, with Banandium gems scattered about, much like the moons in Mario Odyssey. Fortunately, that's where the comparisons end, because Mario can't punch through just about every piece of terrain in these underground worlds. Donkey Kong's brute strength allows him to dig tunnels and smash structures with his bare fists. He can also pick up terrain to throw at enemies or surf through prickly thorns. He must have taken lessons from Link too, as he can climb most surfaces without a stamina meter. DK's movement is nearly limitless, and the first thing we did upon booting the game up was smash every wall in the first room. It's a fun novelty, variety that quickly grows boring due to its repetitive nature, which is why we don't recommend going straight into digging right away when entering a new stage, at least digging every wall you see. We found it was better to follow the path to get the lay of the land, and if we saw an item of interest, like gold sticking out of the ground, we would go to it and see where it took us. This way of exploring expectedly leads to some distractions from the main story path, as you could start digging frantically for treasure chests and Banandium gems, or you could come across the many challenge courses. These place DK in a pocket universe, with tasks like defeating a group of enemies, surfing down a hazardous slope, and collecting a certain amount of Banandium gems. Though there's only a handful of specific challenge types, they're all made unique with vastly different level layouts and obstacle changes. We weren't trying to finish this game under a bit of a time crunch to make this review, but that was difficult as we wanted to keep playing these challenge courses whenever we found them. They are just that good, often cleverly implementing the game's physics engine and destructible environments. Some of them make use of DK's new transformations, giving him abilities like increased strength, fast running speed, and temporary flight. They are acquired by visiting Elder Kongs in certain sublayers and bringing back their records, often split into multiple pieces. This will activate a cutscene where Pauline sings a unique song for that power, and they are a blast to watch. As fun as these transformations are, we didn't find much use for all of them outside of their respective sublayers. Only 2 out of the 5 were the most practical for every level, but I'm sure we'll be using each one a lot more once we continue our post-game search for all 777 Banandium gems. Earlier, we compared these to the Power Moons in Super Mario Odyssey, only the gems are more than just collectibles. For every 5 you get, that's 1 point towards DK's skill tree, where you can upgrade his health, strength, and other abilities like the sonar clap length and Bananergy level to use those transformations longer. This skill tree is a great incentive to keep searching for those Banandium gems, as these upgrades will be necessary to make the tough final boss more manageable. Collecting these Banandium gems is the main goal in Donkey Kong Bananza, and like in 3D Mario, it is fun. Searching a stage head to toe for these crystallized fruits is a good time, thanks to DK's varied moveset and strength. We just wish the other collectibles were as rewarding, the most common of which are gold, used for buying items at the stuff shop like balloons, and apple juice that heals you upon life depletion. Given that it's hard not to have a bunch of gold on you at all times, it's easy to stock up on these materials, but NPCs will sometimes ask you for gold to bring down blockades or build barrels and rest stops. So while gold is useful in that regard, it's still not as rewarding as the Banandium gems. Oh, and it's used to recharge the transformations, but because they're so common, you'll never not be able to transform. There are also these chips used for the sole purpose of exchanging them for Banandium gems. So they're basically just extra steps to getting Banandium gems. Then there are the fossils, which can be redeemed to buy clothing for DK and Pauline. There's even fur dye, but we couldn't possibly rid Donkey Kong of his glorious brown fur. Each clothing item has its own buff, like swimming faster, resisting poison water, and extending transformation times. Unfortunately, the process of changing into these clothes is cumbersome, as you can't just simply change on the fly while playing. You have to find a closet, which will load into the menu to change clothes, then it will load back into the game. It's not the slowest process, but it could certainly be much faster, like how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do it, especially with the Switch 2's increased power and loading speeds. While we're on that subject, let's talk about Donkey Kong Bananza's performance, as the game's director Kazuya Takahashi said before release that there would be frame rate dips during major changes and destruction in the environment. We can confirm that, yes, there are frame rate dips during some intense moments where a lot is happening on screen, most of which come in the latter half of the game. This is rather disappointing for a new game console, and we hope these frame rate hitches are able to be patched out. That said, these are uncommon occurrences that did not ruin our fun, as it still runs at a steady 60 FPS more often than not. Sometimes these technical issues come with developing for a new console, and we will likely see games with much better visuals and performance on Switch 2 in the coming years. Let's move on to enemies, of which there are many. Flying ones, rolling ones you can pick up and throw, and the most common ones are crocoids, crocodile skeletons covered in different terrain. Take out the sand, ground, or rock armor, and they're exposed to a good old-fashioned Donkey Kong beating. The environment can be used against them as well, with our favorite terrain being boom rock that instantly explodes on impact. It's great for excavation too. The most disappointing enemies, however, are the bosses, as the majority of them are way too easy and can be beaten in less than 30 seconds. We're not exaggerating. Some of the best ones are like the crocoids, and that they are made of a certain element that has to be dealt with appropriately, like using the Kong transformation for increased strength against metal. At the very least, most of these weak bosses are in the first half of the game, as the latter half has more interesting ones, especially the last few. Finally, we want to conclude with something that may be no more than a nitpick, but it's a nagging thought we had while playing the first new Donkey Kong game in 11 years. Bonanza is great, but at times it doesn't feel like a Donkey Kong game. Like, if you took these gorgeous levels and swapped DK with Mario, it would make sense as a Mario game 90% of the time. The 10% where it wouldn't make sense would be with the Banandium gems and conversations with the other Kongs. So, Kongversations, I'm sorry. DK games before this had a specific vibe to them, one with more jungles and wilderness. Of course, the forest layer has some of that, but the closest Bonanza gets to those original vibes are the nostalgia challenge courses that recreate levels from series past, with musical remixes that are pleasing to the ears. Regardless, the lack of true Donkey Kong vibes or whatever does not detract from Bonanza being an amazing game. While it's similar in a lot of ways to Super Mario Odyssey, it plays quite differently with DK's smashing mechanic, animal transformations, and skill tree. It's also a meaty game, taking us about 16 hours to get to the end credits that felt twice as long as Odyssey. And to think this game is $10 cheaper than Mario Kart World, even though it has way more meaningful content. Or should I say, Kong-tent. I'm not sorry. The only elements holding it back from true perfection are the weak boss battles and other collectibles that aren't as useful as the Banandium gems. Now that we're done with this review, we're going to go back and play some more Donkey Kong Bonanza to get all the Banandium gems in its post-game. But before we do that, we have to give this game a high score of 93 out of 100. It is currently the best Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive so far.